In this video, I am going to be looking at the different styles of hydraulic threads that you will be typically encountering when working with farming equipment. For example, a tractor might have a hose that needs to connect to a control valve that you're adding to the tractor, but the hose that you're working with a lot of times won't match up with the port that you need to connect it to. And that's where hydraulic adapters come in. And so there's always two things to think through when you are getting a hydraulic adapter. The first is what style of thread do you have? There's going to be a few different styles. And then also the size of the thread. Usually when you're working with farming equipment, hydraulics, you're going to be running into one or multiple of these styles. Pipe thread, which is used in a lot of different applications on the farm, and you run into that with hydraulics as well. O-ring face, which is going to be common on, say, a John Deere front-end loader or a precision planter. O-ring boss is pretty common. JIC is common. And then sometimes you'll run into metric as well. So there's always the two things to figure out: the style that you need and then the size that you need. And this video is talking about identifying the style. And then a different video will talk about how to figure out what size you need. This hydraulic adapter is O-ring boss. This is male O-ring boss. You've got the O-ring right here, and that's providing the seal. You've got the threads, which come right down to the edge, and then you've got the flat face right here. There's no taper at all. This side is O-ring female. That's a little bit harder to identify, and it's maybe a little bit hard to show in the video as well, but the threads go straight down. There's not a taper. And then there's a little ridge right here that you can see. And then there is no O-ring on the female side because, of course, it's the male O-ring side that's going into it, and this O-ring will be what's providing the seal. Notice too that this is not swiveling. O-ring female typically doesn't swivel because that would normally leak. This fitting is male pipe thread to female pipe thread. To identify male pipe thread, you can see that it tapers. I'm going to use a calipers just to illustrate. It's not very much of a difference, but it is enough that it would show up on a calipers. So I'm measuring the very top of the threads here, and I'm coming up with 0.850 inches. And then here I'm measuring the very bottom of the threads, and I'm coming up with 0.814 inches. Female pipe thread, visually you can't really see the taper as much in there. But you can see the style where it's kind of like there's like a little lip in there. And then also female pipe thread, it's common for that to be a swivel as well. The swivel, with the way that the pipe thread is tapered, does not cause problems with leaking. Of course, with pipe thread you are usually using tape as well to help with the sealing. This fitting has the thread style of JIC. This side is male JIC, and this side is female JIC. The things to look for with identifying JIC is it's going to be a silver color fitting, and then there's going to be a taper right here. There's a different style fitting that has a taper as well, but that's not usually used in farming equipment. And so if you're running into a fitting that has this very clear taper here, and you're working with farm equipment, you can assume that that's JIC. Notice that there's not an O-ring on this one. There's no O-ring on the female end either. What's providing the seal with this style is actually that taper. Then on this end we've got the female JIC. Notice that it does swivel. A JIC female is typically going to be a swivel. You've got that taper providing the seal, and so the swivel doesn't cause any problems with leaking. When you look down inside a JIC fitting, you can see that down inside there's the taper as well, which of course is going to rest up against the male taper when the male is threaded on there. This fitting is male O-ring face to female O-ring face. This is the type of fitting that with farm equipment you'll see a lot on John Deere front-end loaders, and then also precision planting equipment. To identify the male O-ring face style, notice there's no O-ring on the outside, but when you look at the bottom, it's got a flush face, and then there's an O-ring embedded in the face. And one of the things that I get a kick out of with hydraulics is how unimaginative the names are. So O-ring face, that is what the style is called, and that's exactly what it is as well. You've got an O-ring in the face. This is what the female O-ring face threads look like. You can see down in there that there's a flat circle that the O-ring on the male part is pressed against. And so the O-ring on the male face pressed against the female flat ring, that is what's providing the seal. And again, notice that female O-ring face in this fitting is can swivel. That's pretty common to see with this style because of the way that the O-ring and the flat ring here are sealing it. Again, the swivel doesn't cause any problems with leaking. Here we're looking at the metric style threads. The reason I have a fitting here with a JIC, one end is JIC and the other end is metric, is because that's most commonly what we're working with, something American on one side and then something metric on the other side. This end of the fitting is male metric. Usually when you're identifying a male metric, you're going to see an O-ring in there, and then there's going to be a washer on the outside of the O-ring. I have gotten confused where I think this is O-ring boss, because you've got your O-ring up there, and then you've got the threads which come down to a flat face here on the bottom. And so it looks visually a lot like O-ring boss. But in this case, there's a washer here. And so a lot of time, that's typically your indication that it's going to be metric. Right here, I have a hose fitting. So this end is not what we're focusing on in the video. This would be crimped onto the hose. What I'm focusing on here is just how to identify a female metric. Again, notice that the female metric is swiveling. That's not going to cause leaking. Usually the female part is actually the part that's on a hose, and you can see that there's a tapered lip on the inside. In this hand I've got female metric, and in this hand I've got the male metric. For fun now, I am going to go through the drawers that have various different combinations of hydraulic fittings, and we'll just look at a few random fittings and just see once where the different thread styles are, kind of the combinations that are common. And these are all ones that are in stock. So these are the type of typical fittings that a farmer would be working with in the United States when working with agricultural hydraulics. This is going to be JIC male on this end. There's an elbow. This would be called an XL, meaning extra long fitting. When you see the washer, it can be tempting to think that this might be metric, but if you look closely, you can see that the washer is actually sitting on top of the O-ring, and then there's a nut which actually moves above it. And so what this is actually O-ring boss. With this type, which is commonly used with cylinders, you don't want to have to twist the fitting itself. to tighten it down because you don't want that 90-degree angle to be pointing in the wrong direction. So what this is doing is allowing you to tighten down the nut onto the washer, which then presses against the O-ring and gives it a nice tight seal. So this is JIC, 90 degree, extra long, to male boss O-ring. This is a really common style. You've got the male JIC going to male O-ring boss. You've got male O-ring boss to male pipe thread. Here you've got male JIC to male JIC bulkhead. The bulkhead is longer and it has a movable nut on it. This is female JIC. You can see the taper down inside there. To O-ring face, male. This is male pipe thread to female face. Female swivels, and you can see the flat ring down inside as well.